It was a quiet Tuesday evening when I first saw him. The neon lights of the diner cast a soft blue and pink glow across the worn leather booths and chrome-edged tables. Mel's Diner had been my refuge for the past 8 months since I moved to the city. There was something comforting about the familiar clink of ceramic mugs against saucers, the sizzle of the grill, and the gentle hum of conversation that never quite reached a crescendo. The place smelled of coffee, bacon, and something sweet, maybe pie or those cinnamon rolls Doris made fresh every morning. I'd come to know the rhythm of the place, how the breakfast crowd differed from the lunch rush, and how peaceful it became in those in-between hours when only regulars like me occupied the booths. I was one of those regulars, Alex, 28, graphic designer by day, an amateur novelist by night. I'd moved to the city for a job at a marketing firm, leaving behind a small town and a relationship that had fizzled out like a sparkler on a rainy 4th of July. The transition hadn't been easy. Making friends in a new city is challenging when you're no longer in college with built-in social structures. So I found solace in routine, and Mel's became part of that routine. 3 times a week, I'd bring my laptop, order the same black coffee and turkey club sandwich, and work on my novel while watching the world go by through the large windows that faced the busy street. That particular evening, I was feeling especially lonely. I'd just gotten off the phone with my sister, who was planning her wedding, and the conversation had left me acutely aware of my own solitude. The empty space across from me in the booth seemed to stretch wider than usual, a physical manifestation of the gap in my life where companionship should be. I remember thinking how ironic it was that I could be surrounded by people, yet feel so completely alone. Let me tell you about the moment that changed everything. The moment that would later become the first line of the acknowledgments in my published novel. I had just finished my usual meal and was preparing to leave. My laptop was already packed away in my messenger bag, and I was counting out bills for my check plus a tip for Doris, who always remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. The diner wasn't particularly busy. A couple at the counter sharing a milkshake with 2 straws, an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner booth, and a group of teenagers laughing over plates of fries near the jukebox. I was so focused on making sure I left the right amount. I've always been meticulous about tipping service workers fairly, that I didn't notice him approaching. There was no warning, no preamble to what would become the most spontaneous moment of my otherwise predictable life. 1 second I was alone, and the next, the booth dipped slightly as someone slid in across from me. When I looked up, I found myself staring into the most arresting pair of eyes I'd ever seen. Deep brown with flecks of amber that caught the diner's neon lights. They belonged to a man about my age, maybe a year or 2 older, with tousled dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. He wore a navy blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms decorated with intricate tattoos that I couldn't quite make out in the dim lighting. His smile was confident but not cocky, as if he was in on a secret that he was about to share with me. Before I could ask who he was or what he wanted, he leaned forward, reducing the space between us. The scent of his cologne, something woodsy with hints of citrus, briefly distracted me. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, "Add this," and slid a folded napkin across the table toward me. In the same fluid motion, he leaned even closer and pressed his lips against mine in a kiss that lasted maybe 3 seconds, but felt both fleeting and eternal. The kiss itself was gentle but deliberate, like a question being asked. His lips were soft, slightly cool from the evening air he must have just come in from. I was too shocked to respond, too caught in the surreality of the moment to either pull away or lean in. It was as if time had suspended itself just for us, the background noise of the diner fading to a distant hum. When he pulled back, that same enigmatic smile played on his lips. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "I've been watching you come in here for weeks. Always alone, always lost in thought. I couldn't leave without doing that at least once." Then, before I could gather my wits enough to respond, he stood up, winked, and walked out of the diner, the bell above the door announcing his departure. I sat there, frozen, my fingers touching my lips as if to confirm what had just happened. The whole encounter had lasted less than a minute, but I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning. It wasn't just the kiss, although that was certainly unexpected and thrilling in its own right. It was the boldness of the gesture, the romantic spontaneity that seemed to belong in movies rather than in my carefully structured life. It took me several moments to remember the napkin he'd slid across the table. I unfolded it with fingers that weren't quite steady. Written in blue ink was a phone number, and beneath it, a simple message. In case you want to continue our conversation. Daniel. Daniel. At least now I had a name to attach to the face that I knew would be appearing in my dreams that night. I carefully folded the napkin and tucked it into my wallet, then finished paying my bill. Doris gave me a knowing look as she took my money. "Friend of yours?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "I'm not sure yet," I replied honestly, and she chuckled as she made change. As I walked home that evening, my mind replayed the encounter on a loop. Who was this Daniel? What had prompted such a bold move? And perhaps most importantly, what was I going to do about it? The practical, cautious part of me thought it was reckless. Who kisses a stranger in a public place? But another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, was exhilarated by the romance of it all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, debating whether to text the number. Was it too eager to reach out the same night? Should I wait a day? Was this whole thing just a prank or a dare? By morning, I decided to wait at least 24 hours before making any move. I needed time to process, to think rationally about what had happened and what I wanted to happen next. The next day at work was a blur. I went through the motions of client meetings and design revisions, but my mind kept drifting back to those amber-flecked eyes and that confident smile. My coworker, Jamie, noticed my distraction during our team lunch. "Earth to Alex," she said, waving her hand in front of my face. "Where are you today? You've been smiling at your salad for 5 minutes." I considered telling her about the encounter, but decided against it. It felt too precious, too personal to share just yet. Instead, I blamed my distraction on a difficult project deadline, and she seemed to accept that explanation, though not without a skeptical look. By the time evening rolled around, I'd composed and deleted at least 15 different text messages to Daniel. Too casual, too formal, too eager, too aloof. Nothing seemed right. Finally, I settled on something simple. "This is Alex from Mel's. Thanks for making an ordinary Tuesday extraordinary." I hit send before I could overthink it any further, then immediately regretted my word choice. Extraordinary? Who talks like that in real life? I groaned and tossed my phone onto the couch, determined not to check it every 30 seconds for a reply. To my surprise, the response came almost immediately. "Alex, I was beginning to think I'd scared you off. Tuesday was just the beginning. How about we make Thursday extraordinary too? Dinner at 7. And just like that, I had a date with the mysterious booth-sliding, kiss-stealing Daniel. I agreed to meet him at a small Italian restaurant he suggested, one I'd passed many times but never entered. As Thursday approached, my anticipation grew, mixed with a healthy dose of nervousness. What if the chemistry had been a one-time thing? What if, in the harsh light of a planned meeting, the magic of our first encounter couldn't be recaptured? I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a green button-down that an ex once told me brought out my eyes. I arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the hostess could hear it when she asked if I was meeting someone. Daniel arrived precisely at 7, looking even better than I remembered. The restaurant lighting was more flattering than the diner's fluorescence, highlighting the sharp lines of his jawline and the warmth in his eyes. He was wearing a charcoal gray sweater that looked soft enough to touch, and I had to resist the urge to reach out and do just that. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased as he sat down across from me. "You're surprised?" I asked. "You're the one who took a pretty big risk at the diner. I'd think you'd be confident I'd show up." He laughed, a rich sound that made me want to hear it again. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever done. I'm still not sure which." "What made you do it?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind for the past 2 days. Daniel took a sip of water before answering. "Honestly, I've noticed you there for weeks. Always alone, always so focused on your laptop or your thoughts. There was something about the way you'd sometimes look up and watch people, not in a creepy way, but like you were trying to understand them, maybe even write their stories." He paused. "I'm a photographer. I notice details, and I couldn't stop noticing you." The conversation flowed easily from there. We discovered we had similar tastes in music and books, though he preferred historical fiction while I leaned toward contemporary. He told me about his photography business, specializing in urban landscapes and architectural details, and I shared my dreams of publishing my novel someday. The hours slipped by unnoticed, and before I knew it, the restaurant was preparing to close. As we walked out into the cool night air, Daniel reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in a way that felt both new and somehow familiar. "Can I walk you home?" he asked, and I nodded, not quite trusting my voice. The walk to my apartment was only about 15 minutes, but we stretched it to 30, taking the scenic route through a small park that was peaceful under the streetlights. When we reached my building, there was an awkward moment where we both seemed unsure of the next step. "I'd invite you up," I said, "but I have an early meeting tomorrow." "I understand," he replied, and I could see that he did. There was no pressure in his eyes, just a gentle acceptance. "But I would like to see you again. Soon." This time, when he leaned in to kiss me, I was prepared. Unlike our first kiss, which had caught me completely off guard, this one was anticipated, reciprocated. His hands cupped my face gently, and mine found their way to his waist, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "Definitely extraordinary," he murmured, and I couldn't help but laugh at the reference to my awkward text. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I saw each other regularly. We explored the city together, finding hidden gems that neither of us had discovered on our own despite living here. Him for 3 years, me for 8 months. He showed me his favorite spots for photography, and I shared the cafes where I liked to write. We had dinner at his place, where I discovered he was an excellent cook, and at mine, where we ordered takeout because cooking has never been my strong suit. Of course, we also returned to Mel's Diner. It became something of a ritual for us, going there on Tuesday evenings, sitting in the same booth where we'd first met. Doris always gave us a knowing smile when she took our orders, and occasionally she'd bring us a slice of pie on the house, with a wink that suggested she took some credit for our relationship. It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. About 2 months in, we had our first real argument. Daniel had an opportunity to travel to Europe for a photography assignment, a 2-week trip that would take him through Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. It was an incredible opportunity for his career, but the timing coincided with a literary festival where I was scheduled to give a reading from my newly finished novel manuscript. "I can't believe you'd schedule this without even discussing it with me," I said, hurt that he'd made such a significant decision without considering how it would affect us. "It's my career, Alex," he replied, his voice tight. "This could open doors for me internationally. I didn't think I needed permission." "It's not about permission," I shot back. "It's about consideration. About being partners who talk through important decisions together." The word partners hung in the air between us. We hadn't yet defined our relationship in such concrete terms, though we'd been exclusive from the start. Daniel's expression softened. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have talked to you about it first. I'm sorry." He reached across the table for my hand. "But I need to take this opportunity. Can you understand that?" I did understand, of course. If our positions were reversed, I'd want him to support my career advancement too. We spent the rest of the evening talking through how we'd handle the separation, daily video calls, text updates, sharing photos of our respective experiences. By the time we went to bed that night, the tension had dissipated, replaced by a deeper understanding of each other's needs and ambitions. The 2 weeks Daniel was in Europe were challenging, but also reaffirming. I missed him terribly, but seeing his excitement as he shared his experiences made me realize how much I valued his happiness. And when he surprised me by showing up at my reading, having taken an earlier flight home specifically to be there, I knew without a doubt that what we had was something special. 6 months after that first kiss in the diner, Daniel asked me to move in with him. His apartment was larger and had better natural light, which was important for both his photography and my writing. The decision was easy. We already spent most nights together anyway, and the thought of waking up beside him every morning filled me with joy. Moving day was chaotic but fun. Our friends helped, turning the task into an impromptu housewarming party. As we unpacked my books and integrated them with his on the built-in shelves that had been one of the selling points of the apartment, I found myself thinking about how our lives were merging in the same way, distinct but complementary, creating something new and beautiful together. That night, after everyone had left, and we were alone in our shared space, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. Daniel pulled me into a dance in the middle of the living room, with no music except the sounds of the city drifting in through the open windows. "Do you remember what I whispered to you that first night?" he asked as we swayed together. "Add this," I replied, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. He nodded, his eyes holding mine. "I meant add this moment, this feeling, this possibility to your life. I saw you sitting there, so beautiful and so alone, and I wanted to be a part of your story." He brushed a strand of hair from my face. "I had no idea you'd become such a huge part of mine." I thought about how different my life had been before that Tuesday evening. How much smaller, how much safer, but also how much less vibrant. Daniel had brought color and spontaneity into my carefully ordered world, challenging me to take risks not just in love, but in my writing and in the way I engaged with life itself. "I'm glad you took that risk," I told him, resting my head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you slid into my booth and kissed a complete stranger. Best decision I ever made," he murmured into my hair. A year after we moved in together, we returned to Mel's Diner for our anniversary. We requested our usual booth, and Doris, who was still working there, brought us our usual orders without us having to ask. As we ate, we reminisced about that first night and all that had happened since. "You know," Daniel said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I almost didn't do it. I'd been working up the courage for weeks, and I'd actually decided that night that it was too crazy, too risky. I was on my way out when I saw you getting ready to leave, and something just clicked. It was a now or never moment." "Thank goodness for now or never moments," I replied, squeezing his hand. After we finished our meal, I reached for my wallet to pay, just as I had that night a year ago. Daniel smiled at the familiar gesture, but instead of sliding into the booth, he slid out and then, to my complete surprise, knelt beside the table. The diner, which had been buzzing with the usual evening activity, suddenly grew quiet. I felt my heart begin to race as Daniel took a small velvet box from his pocket. "Alex," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion I could see in his eyes, "a year ago in this very spot, I took the biggest risk of my life when I slid into your booth and kissed you. Every day since then has confirmed what I suspected that night, that you are extraordinary in every way, and that my life is immeasurably better with you in it." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Will you take another risk with me? Will you marry me?" The diner erupted in applause and cheers before I could even respond, but Daniel's eyes remained fixed on mine, waiting. In that moment, I thought about all the small decisions that had led us here. My choice to become a regular at Mel's, his decision to act on his feelings, both of us choosing to be vulnerable and open to where this connection might lead. "Yes," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear over the noise. "Absolutely yes." As Daniel slipped the ring onto my finger and stood to kiss me, Doris appeared with 2 slices of pie and a bottle of champagne that she must have been keeping on ice, just in case. "On the house," she said with a wink. "I knew from that first night you two were something special." Later that evening, as we walked home hand in hand, I thought about how life's most meaningful moments often come when we least expect them. When someone slides into our booth while we're paying the bill and whispers, "Add this," before kissing us senseless. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand gestures or carefully planned meetings, but with spontaneous acts of courage that change everything in an instant. Daniel and I were married 6 months later in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. We wrote our own vows, and in mine, I thanked him for that moment of boldness that brought us together. "You taught me that the most beautiful chapters of our lives often begin when we least expect them," I said, "and I can't wait to write the rest of our story together." Today, 3 years after that first kiss, we still go to Mel's Diner every Tuesday. It's our tradition, our way of honoring where we began. Sometimes we bring our laptops and work side by side, me on my second novel, him editing his photographs. Sometimes we just talk, sharing the details of our days and our dreams for the future. And always, without fail, when the check comes, Daniel slides into my side of the booth, whispers, "Add this," in my ear, and kisses me. A beautiful reminder of how one spontaneous moment can change the course of 2 lives forever. Total _char_count, 18,742.